Chapter 10. Rothschildiana. In the foregoing pages we have endeavored to present the reader with a clear insight into the characters of the heads of the different firms by means of a number of anecdotes which are both more effective and more entertaining than mere description. The anecdotes already given we have good reason to consider authentic, but there are many others which are undoubtedly the creation of lively imaginations, and have little foundation in fact. The Rothschilds have so long held a prominent place in public affairs, their sayings and doings have been so closely watched and reported, that it is not surprising to find that innumerable tales have been published about them. A large number of the anecdotes are, as we have stated, quite unreliable, still there are some so highly characteristic that it is difficult to believe them entirely devoid of truth. This state of things was somewhat embarrassing. We were at first inclined to omit all anecdotes about the authenticity of which we did not feel confident, but, as their perusal is pretty sure to afford some amusement, we have, on second thoughts, deemed it our duty to bring them together in a separate chapter, without pledging ourselves in any way for their truthfulness. With this reservation we submit the following stories to our readers, who can decide whether we were justified or not in our course of procedure. Baron Anselm von Rothschild on one occasion lost a ring which he prized very highly, not on account of its intrinsic value, but because it had been given him by the Emperor of Austria in recognition of the valuable services rendered by the family to the imperial monarchy. The Baron offered a reward of 350 florins a year to the person who should restore the cherished ring. The daughter of a humble publican proved to be the lucky individual. She presented herself with great humility at the residence of the wealthy financier, who recognized the article with demonstrations of the least pleasure, and caused 500 florins to be paid the girl in advance, though that was something beyond the amount of the annuity. He also gave instructions for a bond to be drawn up to secure the regular payment of the allowance in future. Having received her recompense, the girl ran home to her parents, in order that they might share in her happiness and good fortune. The old people could scarcely believe that their daughter had received so handsome a reward for the discovery of an article of such little value. After some consideration they concluded that rather than wait for the annual allowance, it would be more advantageous to obtain a lump sum down, as they might thereby be enabled to purchase the house in which they lived. The girl returned to Rothschild, who received her very affably, and, having learned her object, was pleased to give her the sum of 7,000 florins in ready money in lieu of the promised annuity. D.R. Busch, the biographer of Prince Bismarck, records, in his well-known work Our Chancellor, an amusing anecdote of Baron Anselm, which deserves reproduction in these pages. He says, "At dinner, at which were Marshal of the Household Per Poncher, and a Herr von Thaden, who was designated as a member of the administration in Reims, the chief told several good anecdotes of Baron Rothschild in Frankfurt. On one occasion he had spoken in his presence with a corn merchant about a sale of wheat, when the merchant said to Rothschild, that being so rich a man who would never think it necessary to put the highest price on his wheat. What rich man do you mean? Replied the old gentleman. Is my wheat worth less because I am a rich man? He used to give dinners sometimes which were quite worthy of his great riches. I remember once when the present king was in Frankfurt I invited him to dinner. Later in the day Rothschild also asked His Majesty to dine with him, to which His Majesty replied that he must settle matters with me. For his own part he did not care with which of us he dined. The Baron now came and proposed that I should cede His Majesty to him, and that I should join them at dinner. I refused this, and Ho had the naivete to suggest that his dinner might be sent to my house, although he could not eat with us, as he partook of only strictly Jewish fare. This proposal also I begged leave to decline naturally, though his dinner, doubtless, was better than mine. Old Metternich, who, by the way, was very kind to me, told me that once when he had been visiting Rothschild, the Baron gave him some luncheon to eat on the way back to Johannesburg. With the luncheon were packed 6 bottles of Johannesburg wine. When Johannesburg, Metternich's estate, was reached, these bottles were taken out and opened. The prince then sent for his wine steward and inquired how much that wine cost him a bottle. 12 guldens, was the answer. Well, take these bottles, and the next order you get from Baron Rothschild, send them back to him, but charge him 15 guldens, for they will then be older. Dining on one occasion with Baron James de Rothschild of Paris, Eugenie de la Croix kept his eyes turned upon his host in so marked a manner that when the company rose to leave the dine room, Baron James could not help asking his guest what it was that so attracted his attention. The painter confessed that for some time past he had vainly sought a head to serve as a model for that of a beggar he intended to hold a prominent position in a painting on which he was then engaged, and that, as he gazed at his host's features, the idea suddenly struck him that the very head he so much desired was there before him. With this explanation, he ventured to ask whether the Baron would do him the favor to sit to him as a beggar. Rothschild, being a great admirer of the art in all its forms, and pleased to be considered one of its chief patrons, readily consented to sit in a character probably never before assumed by a millionaire. The next day found him at the painter's studio. De la Croix placed a tunic round his shoulders, put a stout staff in his hand, and made him pose as if he were resting on the steps of an ancient Roman temple. In this attitude he was discovered by one of the artist's favorite pupils, who alone had free access to the studio at all times. Struck by the lifelike excellence of the model, the newcomer congratulated his master at having at last found exactly what he wanted. Naturally concluding the model had only just been brought in from some church porch, and never dreaming the character assumed by him was far from his true one, he seized an opportunity when his master's eyes were turned to slip a piece of money into the beggar's hand. Rothschild thanked him with a look, and kept the money. The pupil soon quitted the studio. In answer to inquiries made, de la Croix stated that the young man possessed great talent but no means. That he had, in fact, to earn his livelihood by giving lessons in painting and drawing. Shortly afterwards the young fellow received a letter stating that charity bears interest, and that the accumulated interest on the amount he had so generously given to one whom he supposed to be a beggar was represented by the sum of 10,000 francs, which were lying at his disposal at the office in the Rue Lafitte. Amongst the endless number of rich and handsome articles Baron James had diligently collected, his guests seldom failed to be struck with admiration by a magnificent porcelain service of singular beauty and design, and remarkable for the superb paintings which adorned its exterior. The history attached to the acquisition of this service is as singular as its beauty. One day an old man, feeble, decrepit, and to all appearance on the verge of the grave, solicited an interview with the Baron. At the very outset the old man's careworn looks and destitute condition awoke the latter's lively sympathy, and this sympathy was strengthened on learning that his visitor was a co-religionist. The old man produced from a bag a plate of such exquisite design and finish, that Baron James, with the instinctive envy of a virtuoso, felt he must at any cost become the owner of such an artistic treasure. After stating he was in a most destitute condition, the visitor proceeded to say that want had compelled him to part with many articles which he had regarded as heirlooms. The plate, he declared, belonged to a service which he had reserved to the last, hoping against hope that necessity would never compel him to part with it, but alas! The time had come when the claims of his starving family could be stopped only by relinquishing possession of this, the last resource against famine. I come to offer this service to you, le Baron, thinking that so beautiful a work of art can find a fitting resting place only in the midst of your well-known collection. Will you buy it? It is indeed beautiful. What do you ask for it? Look you, sir, said his visitor, I am now an old man, bowed down with years, and have not long to live. I am poor, but I wish if possible to end the few remaining years of my life as comfortably as I can. Will you, in exchange for this valuable porcelain service, give me an allowance for life of 100 francs a month? It is a trifle to you, and I am so old. The Baron reflected a moment, examined the plate afresh, and at length answered, well, be it so. Here is the first payment. Send me the service, and leave me your name and address, that the money may be sent to you regularly. The porcelain service was duly delivered. A month later, as the Baron was sitting in his office, a man entered, and claimed payment of the allowance then due. The newcomer was young, stoutly made, of a vigorous constitution, and likely to live for another 50 years. But you are not the man to whom I promised the allowance, said the Baron. Excuse me, I am indeed the man. But he was at least 80 years of age. You are mistaken, I am but 30. But your aged appearance and careworn looks were certainly unmistakable. Thanks to your great generosity, my recovery has been rapid and surprising. The Baron smiled at the remark, and gave orders for the payment of the money, exclaiming as he did so, oh, you are an excellent comedian, and have taken me in completely. You flatter me. I am probably the first who has done so, answered the Jew, politely bowing to the millionaire. Strange as were the circumstances and terms on which the service was bought, Baron James had little reason to repent of his bargain. This reference to objects of art reminds us of another anecdote, of which, if we remember rightly, Baron Alphonse was the subject. On one occasion he started out for a walk, and presently found himself in the district immediately behind the Pantheon. As the neighborhood was quite strange to him, he soon lost himself. No cabs or omnibus were to be seen anywhere, nor did anyone pass of whom he could inquire his way. At first the situation rendered him somewhat nervous, but presently, when he thought of the strange novelty such a predicament was to him, he became reassured, and laughed in anticipation at the amusement the adventure would afford him. He therefore continued to walk on without troubling himself as to his whereabouts. Presently he passed a shop for the sale of second-hand goods, and his quick eye caught sight among the rubbish of an article which struck him as worth inspection. It proved to be an antique barometer of the time of Louis XVI. It bore no trace of its original gilding, although the carving was still in a perfect state of preservation. Being a good judge of such things, and an ardent collector, the Baron determined to buy it. The price asked was 10 francs, and the Baron congratulated himself on having secured so great a bargain. On putting his hand into his pocket, he discovered that in his hurry he had forgotten to bring his purse with him. It was a day of accidents. Well, it does not matter. I will take the barometer at all events, he said to the shopkeeper. Send it up to my hotel. I am Baron Rothschild. You will receive the money when you deliver the barometer. I do not know either your name or address, sir, nor do I ever send things out that are not previously paid for. This was a startling rebuff for Baron Rothschild. It was a perfectly novel experience to meet with anyone ignorant of his great name. Being, however, in a good humor and regarding it as part of the day's adventure, he was only the more amused. He was about to explain who and what he was, when he happened to notice a porter passing on the opposite side of the road. Beckoning to the man, he asked him, "Have you ever heard of Baron Rothschild?" "Well, that is a queer question. Heard of Baron Rothschild? Of course I have. But why do you inquire?" said the man, somewhat crossly, as if he suspected his interlocutor was jesting. "Because Madame here has just refused to trust him for 10 francs, was the reply. "'Tis that really true, Madame de Clos?" said the porter, in great astonishment. "Yes, to be sure, Monsieur Pierre." "One cannot know everybody," answered the shopwoman with a shrug, "but I know you, and if you will become guarantee." At these words the Baron interrupted the woman with such a hearty burst of laughter that it was some minutes before he could recover himself. "Well, Monsieur Pierre," he said, still laughing, "if you will kindly become surety for me, will you go and call a cab, and then we can take the barometer home." The porter required no second bidding. He hastened off and soon returned with the cab. They then drove to the Baron's house, where the porter received a handsome reward for his exertions. Attempts to ruin the Rothschilds as well as to frustrate and wreck the operations undertaken by them have frequently been made by persons jealous of their extraordinary success. It is needless to say that all such attempts have signally failed. At the outset luck has sometimes favored these bold but reckless opponents, but it has been owing to the sufferance of the Rothschilds, who, conscious of the enormous power at their command, knew they could crush their upstart rivals at any moment they pleased. Such attempts would be more common were it not known that the only chance of rendering them successful would be to operate on as extensive a scale as that habitually adopted by the great financiers. One of the boldest of these would-be rivals was a Mr. James H. who bought and sold enormous amounts of stock in a very brief period, and, so far from imitating the secrecy marking Rothschild's operations, deemed it essential to the success of his scheme that all his dealings should be done as publicly as possible. He was the son of a wealthy country banker, and at the time he commenced speculating on change had 50,000 stock inscribed in his name, though the stock was really his father's. The reputation of owning so large an amount of stock was very useful on change, as it conferred upon him and his transactions an importance which would otherwise have been wanting. After some time had elapsed, the stock was transferred back into his father's name. At the outset, and until he had perfectly mastered all the rules and usages of the house, he acted with the greatest prudence and discretion, confining himself to transactions of a very humble nature. Gradually he enlarged his operations, and the natives, as the members of the house were called, began to look upon the boldness of his dealings with mingled surprise and admiration. Success attending his speculations, he was watched and followed in them by a crowd of persons such as will always hang about a successful man. He became a power on change. Bulls and bears alike dreaded him, for he was as independent in his dealings as Rothschild himself. Consols, at the time of which we are writing, were quoted at about 96. A few months later symptoms of a panic set in, and the unfavorable tendency of the market was aggravated by the fulminations hurled, for reasons best known to himself, by a well-known writer on money matters against the Bank of England. In spite, however, of these adverse circumstances, prices showed a decided unwillingness to fall. Mr. H studied the state of the market closely, and, being convinced in his own mind that a leader alone was wanted to carry on a successful war against the Rothschilds, determined that he himself would be that leader. He at once began his attack by selling out 200,000 consols at 96. This operation concluded, he advertised it well, and made known his willingness to sell 1 million more. Purchasers were found for the whole at prices varying from 94 to 90, at which price consols closed for the day. The next day he resumed his tactics to depress the market, and so successful were they that consols closed at about 84. As might have been expected, a run on the Bank of England took place, simultaneously with this sudden and unlooked for fall in the price of consols. He then repurchased so largely that when a reaction set in and prices recovered, his gains amounted to more than 100,000. But the rivalry of Mr. H did not long continue to trouble Rothschild. Emboldened by the success of his first effort, he tried to repeat his attack 2 years later, and even on a larger scale. Rothschild, however, had his eyes about him, and, divining his rival's plans, laid a trap into which that rival fell. The result was that Mr. H was utterly ruined. He was declared a defaulter and his name stuck up on the blackboard of the stock exchange. Then, and not till then, was it discovered that the 50,000 stock was not his own, as had been supposed, but his father's. At a charitable sale, held in 1858 at the Hôtel Lambert in Paris, by the Princess Chartraska, in favor of the distressed Poles, an incident took place between Georges Sand and Baron Rothschild. Madame Dudevant, Georges Sand, had a stall on the occasion, and displayed a number of fancy articles for sale. Baron Rothschild happened to pass, and the fair saleswoman addressed him with the usual request to buy something. "What am I to buy?" said the Baron. "You have nothing at all suitable for me. But stay, an idea strikes me. Give me your autograph. Sell me that." Madame Dudevant took a sheet of paper and wrote upon it as follows: "Received from Baron Rothschild the sum of 1,000 francs, for the benefit of the distressed Poles, Georges Sand." Baron Rothschild read it, thanked her, and, handing her a note for the amount named, went away highly gratified. It is well known that the lifelong ambition of all true Americans is to do Europe before they die, and none can vie with them in the thoroughness with which they do the sights and places of interest they may happen to visit. Their curiosity is insatiable, and is only equalled by their irresistible determination to satisfy it at all costs. No false modesty deters them from questioning strangers. They will accost the first man they meet, if they think he can remove their doubts or add to their knowledge. The following account, written by an American, confirms our statement, and explains itself. "When I arrived in England I set myself to work to accomplish the object of my journey, to see all that I could. And in doing so I attracted much attention. J made many acquaintances, and was told by them that I was the best representative of my nation they had ever seen. In curiosity, and a determination to gratify that feeling, I think I was. I spared no pains to see all the sights and hear all the gossip that came in my way. This characteristic at last brought me into an awkward predicament, which I purpose to describe in the following anecdote. One morning, while I was in London, I started out for a walk. I had heard a great deal about the famous place which the Rothschilds were building, and I sallied forth on this particular morning for the purpose of seeing it. I soon reached it, and through the kindness of the master builder was shown over it. I had finished my inspection, and was standing on the sidewalk gazing at it with undisguised admiration, when I noticed a gentleman a few feet from me, watching the building. He was a fat, portly old fellow, with a good-humored face, in spite of his haughty look, and I thought from his appearance he might be the contractor for the work, so I determined to accost him and gain what information I could. "Good morning, sir," I said, approaching him. He bowed politely, but without speaking. "I am a stranger here," I went on. "I have been looking over this building, and I would to ask you for some information concerning it." "I shall be happy to oblige you," said he, politely. He was very kind in telling me much that was of interest. At last I said, abruptly, "I suppose you have seen Rothschild, sir?" "Which one?" he asked. "The old cock," I replied. "I see the old cock every day," he answered, giving me a strange glance. "By George," I went on, "I should like to have a look at him. People say he is a gay old chap, and lives high. I wish I had him in my power. I'd not let him get away until he had shelled out a pile of his money." The old gentleman burst out into a laugh. "Baron Rothschild had to work for his money, and deserves to enjoy it," he said at length, when he had got over his merriment. "Maybe so," I remarked. "But I reckon he did a heap of squeezing to get it." The old man's face flushed. "I never heard the honesty of the house called in question," he said stiffly. "Didn't you? Well, to tell you the truth, neither have I, but I wouldn't be surprised if PM right, after all." The old man's face grew as black as a thundercloud, and he bit his lip without speaking. "People tell me," I continued, not heeding this, for I thought it natural that the old fellow should be annoyed at anything said against his employers. "People tell me the Rothschilds have made 2 fortunes. Now, as most people can make only one, I feel somewhat interested to learn the manner in which this was done. Can you tell me, sir?" The old man's face brightened instantly, and he replied, smilingly, with more politeness than he had as yet manifested. "Certainly, sir. People do say the house of Rothschilds made one fortune by being careful to mind their own business, and the other by letting that of others alone. Good morning, sir." With an elegant bow he turned and left me staring at him in blank amazement. I began to smell a rat, and I looked for someone of whom to ask the old gentleman's name. He had stopped at the upper end of the building, and was giving some directions to a workman. I saw a handsome man of about 30 standing a short distance off. He, too, was looking at the building. I liked his face and went up to him. "Excuse me for troubling you, sir," I said, "but I am a stranger in this country, and would like to ask you a question." "I shall be happy to give you any information in my power," he said, politely. "Then can you tell me the name of that old gentleman?" I asked, pointing to my sarcastic acquaintance. "Certainly," he replied. "That is Baron Rothschild, the head of the house of that name." "Woo!" I exclaimed in astonishment. "I've got myself into a scrape then." "What is the matter?" asked my friend, curiously. I told him what had occurred between the Baron and myself. He laughed heartily, and remarked pleasantly when I had concluded, "That was awkward. He's a crusty old chap," I said, considerably vexed. "He's as cross as a bear." "Oh, that's only his way," replied my companion. "He is a good, kind-hearted man, but is rather eccentric." "I should say so," I replied. The gentleman asked me a great many questions concerning America, and seemed interested and amused by my answers. "Do you know Baron Rothschild?" I inquired, at length. "I have met him several times," was the reply, "and I have an appointment to wait upon him today." "Then I wish you'd say to him," I went on, "that I did not know to whom I was talking this morning, or I would not have said so much, and that he need not have been so huffish about one tea." "I will do so," said my acquaintance, laughing. "You must not mind him. He was a little nettled at it, but will be the first to laugh at the adventure when he recovers his good humor. Good morning." With a bow and a pleasant smile he left me. Just then a workman passed by. I stopped him and asked if he could tell me the name of the gentleman who had just left me. "That was one of the younger Rothschilds," he said, and I waited to hear no more, but, pulling my hat down over my eyes, set off at once for my lodgings. I was absolutely afraid to speak to a stranger for a week, for fear he might be a Rothschild. End.